first item of business, roll call.
Kristen Runge,
Here.
Tricia Brown,
Here.
Al Dassow, David Kennedy, Tom McCulloch, Jeff Tews, Abigail Zellner.
Here. All right, next item on the agenda is minutes. Do we have any corrections or amendments to the minutes?
I'll move to accept.
I'll second. All right, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. Next up, we have public comment. Do we have any public comments? All right. And did you fill out there's not a form there. Not a form there? All right, so.
My name is Linda Ashmore. I live at 114 South Street, so I'm a Wanakee resident. I have a compliment and a request. The compliment is regarding the Housing Betterment Fund. In the last week, I've seen an article in the State Journal and also an article in Business Magazine, kind of telling what the program is and saying that it will, help people with grants up to from $2,000 to $10,000. So it's nice to see it starting to be publicized. And I know that Tim did a lot of work on it. The CDA did a lot of work on it. I think Todd at the beginning was working on it too. So thank you for that. The second thing is a request for the part where the meeting agenda item where you might go into closed session. There's a DOJ open meetings compliance guide. And that guide says that you need to be specific about what you have on your agenda items. And downtown properties is not specific. Downtown is a huge area. And so I'm asking that be the discussion be an open session and those properties be identified. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Linda. Any other comments? Do we have anyone online? No? All right. Next item on the agenda then is item number 1, presentation and public hearing regarding proposed amendment of the boundaries and project plan of tax incremental district number 9. Presentation first, public hearing second, correct? All right, over to you.
Thank you. Very quickly, with us this evening is Todd Taves with Ehlers and Associates, who is the village's financial consultant. They prepared the project plan that you will be discussing this evening. It is in your packet, and I would ask at this time, I guess, Todd to go over a brief overview of the project plan prior to the public hearing, so that for the benefit of the public as well as the CDA. So with that.
Thank you.
That better? And you go right to the next slide, Tim. So just a very quick explanation. I won't assume everyone in the room knows what tax increment financing is. So just a quick graphic. So a TIF district is a geographical area that consists of one or more parcels. And this body recommends, the village board ultimately approves. But when a district is created, what happens is whatever value is there as of the effective date, that value is frozen for tax purposes with respect to where the taxes go with the 4 taxing jurisdictions. So we're talking about the village, the school, the county, and Madison College. So in other words, those 4 jurisdictions will continue to receive the taxes on that value that's there when the TID is created for, continuing through the life of the district. So there's no loss there. Once the TID is created, though, anything that happens prospectively, so this would be value resulting from new construction, resulting from economic appreciation, that's captured as the tax increment, which is the purple portion. Importantly, properties within tax increment districts are taxed exactly the same way as properties not in tax increment districts. Wisconsin has a uniformity clause, so all properties pay the same rate. The difference is that the taxes associated on that purple area, the increment, all of that goes to the TIF special fund. So instead of the village, for example, getting a share, while the TIF is open, the village's share goes into the TIF fund. And what that is used for is to pay for what's termed project costs. Project costs are undertaken in order to allow for new development to occur. Could be incentives, as we'll talk about this evening, could be public infrastructure. Those are typically the two big things. And once either the TID has reached its maximum statutory life, or you've achieved enough incremental value and revenue to pay those costs, the district at that point closes. And the whole idea here is that you're enabling something that otherwise would not happen under normal market conditions. And at the conclusion of the TIF, you have more value than you did when you started, which benefits all taxing jurisdictions because they are now getting taxes on that higher amount that otherwise would not have been there. So just again, real quick overview, we can do a TIF 101 for like an hour. I could talk about it all night, but that's the quick snapshot of it, just to make sure people are familiar with the concept of what we're talking about this evening. And next, Tim. So specifically what is before this body tonight is an amendment to the project plan and boundary of tax incremental district number 9. So geography wise, we're just south of State Highway 19 in the business park. The area we're talking about is an existing TID number 3, which will collect its final tax increment next year. So one of the reasons TID 9 was originally created was realizing we were getting to the end of the life of TID 3. There wouldn't be enough years left to allow for productive development and recovery of costs. So TID 9 was created originally for the Tormac project, subsequently assumed by Octopi. Originally was TID 9 was this parcel. About 2 years ago, it was amended to bring in the parcel to the north, both of which Octopi has now built on. What we're talking about this evening is the parcel in red. This single parcel would be added to the district under the proposal to allow for newcomer supply to build roughly a 35,000 square foot building. The district is a 20-year industrial TID, 5 years have elapsed. So there's 15 more years remaining. And the required test is that at least half the property within the district has to be zoned and suitable for industrial development. In this case, all of the real property is. The 92.7 is there because the right-of-way specifically isn't considered suitable. So we meet the test that would be required for the amendment. And next, Tim. Just kind of a closer up view here. So again, the red is the boundary with the proposed amendment to include the parcel I mentioned east of Prairie View Court, where newcomer supply is intending to build. This is a list of the project costs that were included in the original plan as it was amended. So that's that first column totaling to just over $3 million. This really is a pay-as-you-go TID. The only significant project cost is that $2.975 million development incentive, which is for Octopi, and then some minor administrative expenses associated with the village's direct costs to administer the district. What we are proposing this evening through this amendment is to bring that 3.06 million total up to 5.3 million, or an increase of 2.2 million. The two areas of increase are one in the development incentive category, roughly 1.9 million, and then also 340,000 or so for intersection improvements. I'll talk about the intersection improvements first and then come back to the incentive. So the village is expecting in the future to have to do intersection improvements on State Highway 19 and Hogan as part of the state project. Recognizing that various areas will contribute to that. We want to have the latitude, if it's determined to be appropriate based on traffic studies, to charge a portion of those improvements to this particular district. So that's a placeholder representing roughly 10% of the cost to include associated interest. So back to the incentive. From a TIF law perspective, this is simply an incentive that would be made on a pay-as-you-go basis to the company, equal to the tax increment generated for a period of 10 years. So the 1.8 is just a derivative of 10 years of projected tax increment. The thing that would be a little bit different about this is that the company has indicated that the reason they need the incentive is to demonstrate the cash flow is necessary to obtain their private financing. When they get to the point of the incentive having been paid, they are willing to enter into agreement with the village where they will repay that under terms and conditions to be determined. So that is a different feature than some of the incentives that the village has provided in the past. I know there was a specific question that came from a resident that Tim had forwarded to me as to whether this type of arrangement is permissible. We did email the Department of Revenue and got a response that essentially says that they don't take a point of view on that because it's up to the village and its legal counsel to make a determination as to whether any particular project cost is appropriate and eligible. And as I mentioned, really the project cost here is the development incentive. The fact that it would be repaid over time is a distinct and separate issue from the TIF law. And, again, a little bit different scenario, but that's, I think, an important distinction here that people understand. One other thing that the village has indicated, and this is identified narratively in the project plan with respect to the other taxing jurisdictions, is that since they're all investing as part of the TID program by foregoing taxes, the village, as it would receive these repayments, even though the district might be closed, would agree to basically on an annual basis disperse pro rata shares of those payments back out so that all the districts that contributed during the life of the TID would receive remuneration for that. This is a couple snapshots of some of the exhibits in there just to show the mechanics. So we have actual on the left. This is value changes that have already occurred. The 2022 numbers, that reflects what was the projected value of the occupied expansions on the two parcels. Since we published this project plan, the Department of Revenue has published the preliminary January 1st, 2023 values, and they did in fact come fairly close to the estimate there. So we've got the two parcels that are now built out for Octopi. What we would be looking at going forward then would be Newcomers Building to be completed in 2024 with an estimated value of $10 million. When we take that projection, again, to include the Octopi facilities, and we've derived there or put the tax increment in three different columns. So we're showing the increment associated with the brewery, with the warehouse, and then with Newcomer to come up with a total revenue projection. We show, again, this is a pay-as-you-go TID, the development incentives to be paid for the brewery and the warehouse for Octopi, and then projected for Newcomer. The request was for actually $2 million, but based on our projections, the value and the current tax rate wouldn't support that. This again will be a matter of development agreement language, but if the village is willing to entertain that and the value is actually higher, the tax rate were to go up, it's possible that those payments could reach $2 million, but the important deal term would be that it would be for a limited period of 10 years. What we are identifying is that in the year 2033 with the red bar, there would be sufficient tax increment accumulated in the fund balance that the village could basically pay off the remaining balance on that Newcomer pay-go and close the district. And importantly, as we look at the model that exists before we layer on this potential amendment, adding this project does not delay the projected closure of the district, so that remains neutral. And just a quick note on schedule. We're here obviously tonight on the 9th for the public hearing in this body's consideration. The Organizational Joint Review Board meeting was held last evening. If this body elects to advance this would go to the village board for consideration on September 5th. And if approved there, the Joint Review Board tentatively scheduled a meeting for September 21st, which would be the final step in the process. Although this body and the village board have approving authority, ultimately it is the representatives of the taxing jurisdictions along with a public member that have the final approving authority. And I would be happy to answer any questions of the commission, or if you want to go to public hearing first.
Questions first? Let's do questions first and public hearing second. What questions do we have? Anyone? No? Okay.
So I'm looking at your summary. Project plan amendment. I can't tell the difference in colors. Looking at your project plan amendment dated August 9th of 2023. My understanding of TIDS is that one of the, I shouldn't say TIDS, one of the approvals that must or conditions that must be approved is the but-for test. And in reading your, and I understand there might be other documents that we've not seen here, but when I'm looking for it as I speak here, the but-for test is simply a representation of management that this project would not go but for this additional $1.9 million in funding. What due diligence does, and I'm not sure this is directed necessarily at you or the village, but what due diligence is required to determine and verify management's representation that they need this money to for the village to advance this money on behalf of the TID? So ultimately, it is a judgment of the Joint Review Board. That is the body that has to make the decision to decide whether they've been presented sufficient information to reach that conclusion. There is no particular requirement other than delivering information to their satisfaction. And I know we do have a representative of the developer here tonight that can probably speak more specifically to what the company's needs are in that respect, if that's useful information.
Well, and I don't want to overstep our bounds if this has been addressed and it's outside the scope of what we're trying to do or purview of what we're supposed to do. That's fine. But from my standpoint, with what I've been given, there's very little but for a sentence that says management represents. And as a former auditor and a CPA, management representation is, we usually look for other evidence that says, prove to me that this is in fact true, as opposed to simply the representation. So it comes from the skepticism that I have when someone simply represents.
Yeah, that's certainly a fair question. And even though it's the Joint Review Board that ultimately has to make that conclusion, we certainly would want the authority as well as the village board to use that same standard. So in this particular case, there's not a great analytical way for us to make that determination other than relying on what the company is indicating. For certain income producing properties like a multifamily, there are ways to actually look at rates of return, IRR upon an assumed sale, and compare that to, standard real estate market conventions. When you've got a company that's building the facility for their own usage, there isn't as good of an ability to actually empirically test that. So again, we are relying on the company coming forward and indicating this. And again, I think that the company's consultant could provide additional information if that's helpful.
Would that be helpful, Al? Should we ask that? Yeah.
It would from my perspective, only because again, I've done a fair amount of projection work. And I know how to read financial statements, and I know when someone goes to a bank, projections are done, and in those projections will be all kinds of information that will be relevant to determine whether or not this project can sustain itself on its own or whether or not it needs additional funding. And again, from what I have, I don't have that in front of me, and maybe we shouldn't, but from my perspective, and having done a fair amount of these projections, I usually like to see the projections that look at the rate of return to see what the IRR is. It's done. I'm suspecting they're going to the bank asking for $8 million for the difference. The bank's not going to lend $8 million on simply someone's representation. So that's where I guess if I'm overstepping the bounds, that's fine. I can back off, but that's, I guess, from my perspective, what I tend to look at.
I think that they're willing to answer the questions. So yeah, yeah.
Kirsten, can I say, I do
Oh,
say, I
I'm
think
sorry.
it's okay for a presentation now, but when we start getting into the give and take, and I think we're kind of leaking into agenda item 2. So
Okay.
my suggestion would be presentation here and then do the
All
public
right.
hearing.
All right.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Hi, my name's Kate Crowley. I'm with Baker Tilly, consultant to Newcomer Supply. To answer your question, in working with Tim, we have provided information per the request of the village in your application for tax increment financing assistance. One of the elements that were requested is our newcomer sources and uses. So we have provided the information around the cost of the project, which is the uses of the financing, and then the sources, which is largely bank financing. In discussions, we've shared that Newcomer has talked to several banks, sort of all of the banks, a little bit of an overstatement, but a lot of banks, all of them in doing their underwriting have the condition of TIF. One community bank is the bank that is most likely to finance this, and they're willing to offer a letter stating that the support from the TIF is necessary for their underwriting.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Other questions? Other questions, Al? Do you have any?
I do, but I'm going to refrain from, I'll let someone else speak first.
Okay. David, do you have any?
What-
Oh, wait.
I think we should have the public hearing.
Oh, okay. Now we'll have the public hearing. Thank you. Thank you.
And then
pre-
on like the discussion and questions, that's all the next agenda item is discussion and action on the resolution. Everything that you guys, I think that kind of leads into that agenda item.
Okay.
And then you can answer all those questions.
I appreciate you keeping me on task. All right. So let's open the public hearing at 6:25. Do we have anyone? Go ahead.
I'm kind of concerned about, we're gonna give $1 million incentive and basically give a $10 million property. I'm sorry. So my concern is that the village is looking at giving a $2 million incentive and would be getting a $10 million property. One of the things that somewhat intrigues me, because I think that the applicant understands that when you take these incentives, that money does not go into the taxing jurisdictions. And that always is one of the things that I don't like about TIDS is that, the school district, MATC, Dane County, the village, they don't get that tax during the time frame that the incentive's being paid. So I do like that idea. I hear a lot about what the developer agreement would deal with those things. I would really want to see, if you're going to actually go forward with this, that the developer agreement is actually figured out before you start taking it to the next levels. It just seems like, I think of how much a house goes for in Wanakee. I think most houses right now are around $400,000 to $500,000. And nobody gives them money to build those houses. So I understand it's nice to broaden our manufacturing base, but I just don't think that it's the right use of taxpayer money. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments for public hearing? All right, seeing none, and we have no one online. All right, then let's close the public hearing at 6:27. And now item 2, consideration and possible action of a resolution approving an amendment to the project plan boundaries and tax increment for district number 9. And now we can ask our questions. Thank you. All right, David.
I guess the first question I always have is, if we're putting up a $2 million incentive on a $10 million project, and that's the total downstroke, what is the company putting up? I mean, where's your skin in the game to match ours? I've borrowed a lot of money in my work career, and I know what the banks are, but could you give me a little, for the public kind of viewpoint, explanation of how the dollars are really going to flow? Is Newcomer getting actual cash? That, tell us how the money really flows instead of just in these fixed
Sure,
statement.
so when I use that term pay as you go, what that means is that the property will get a tax bill, just like any other property based on the regular rate. They will have to make that payment to the village. So the taxes. Mike, please. Was that turn off? Okay. So the taxes will be paid. They will be received by the village, and then under the terms of the agreement, a percentage of those will turn around and get paid back to the company. So it is the taxes that they are paying that is the source of the funding for the incentive. The village is not fronting any money. They're not borrowing any money. It's essentially a return of taxes for a period of time.
Could I ask, and I think because Kristen and I had the benefit of a presentation at a village board meeting from which we approved moving forward with the consideration of the expansion. There's a little bit more detail shared on the project that I think it would be helpful for this body to understand kind of the bigger picture, not just the facility itself. So I don't know if Kate, that's you or the owners.
It stays on for me, Todd. I don't know. Oh, is it? Oh, well, again, I'm Kate Crowley. Mike and Sam Welch are here, the co-owners of the company. I'll let them tell you a little bit more about Newcomer Supply. But one thing I wanted to share before I hand over the floor to them is, while we're projecting a $10 million assessed value, Newcomer's making what's probably a $15 or $16 million investment into the business park. And that is, as you'll hear, a 35,000 square foot building, which is a mixture of laboratory and office space. Newcomer's currently located in Middleton, bought this land here in the business park in 2019. And the numbers worked. And they didn't ask for TIF at that point because it wasn't necessary. But since then, as we all know, construction costs have gone up, interest rates have gone up, and that is why there is a need at this point. So only the end of 2022, when it became obvious that between the construction costs and the interest rates, the project didn't work from a financial perspective, as they learned from their banks, did Newcomer approach the village. But I will let Mike or Sam give a little bit of an overview on the company and the project.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mike.
Says you were reelected.
Yeah, I think so. So, hi, my name is Michael Welch. I'm president of Newcomer Supply, co-owner with Sam. So during our presentation earlier to the village, what my role was to talk a little bit about the Newcomer story. Sam then fills in with some more of the details on the project, and that's kind of how we ran it last time. Is that what we'd like to kind of repeat? Okay, so Newcomer Supplies, it's a family originated company which started by our mother back in Oak Park, Illinois. The company started off as a medical supply company specializing in histology pathology labs. And these are, generally speaking, diagnostic labs that serve mostly hospitals, but generally, patient care. Company started off mostly selling chemistry, special dyes, reagents, that type of thing. Started in our home. I was in high school, I'd come home, do invoicing, and I was really excited about that. I knew there were some funds coming in. After I graduated college at Loyola University in Chicago, the company moved to Middleton, Wisconsin. At that point, I took a break from my plans, which I didn't really have at the time, to help Marcia establish here in Middleton. So I spent a year and a half with her here, and then I went back to Chicago to finish my graduate school and start my career there. Around 2010, I started discussions with my soon-to-be wife. We decided to move back to Manchester. I decided to move back. She came with me. At that point, we engaged with our mom, Marcia, to begin the process of transferring the company to myself and help her retire. In that time, the company was steadily growing from 1986 when it started, 1993 when it came to Middleton, and then at the point where I was coming back in 2010, company was steadily growing. 2013, 13, Sam came into the company, became our operations manager. The company has been growing even at a greater pace from then to now. In 2015, the ownership of the company officially transferred to me. And last year, Sam and I split ownership. Marcia also passed away last year. We are very excited about this move to Wanakee and very excited about our exponential growth path that we see the company being able to experience in this new facility with the new square footage that we are frankly very much in need for. Our growth is happening, it's there, but it's definitely restricted by our current facility size in Middleton. So we're very excited to get going. So at this point, I think it's a good chance for Sam to fill you in on the project details. So.
Green lights on. So my name is Sam Welch. I'm the younger brother. Mike tends to take care of the people. I tend to take care of the things. I think that ma'am, you brought up a real good point of the comparison of what a commercial property is in value to a community versus a residential property versus a commercial property. Because you could say if the building project cost is $16 million, that could be 32 homes. And what's the reason why an incentive is of value to Wanakee? And when you think about the reason for the but for, it's about, again, my job is things, but when I have to deal with things, I have to deal with things in regards to their service of people, right? We don't have enough square footage for the amount of people we have. We've got more than 30 people going through our building in a day. We got 2 bathrooms. So that's the practical reason that starts with us needing a whole new building. So we need a new building. We need a bigger space because we need to bring more people in. So when we bring in a project that's $15-16 million, we're bringing in now the ability to go to 40 people and 50 people and 60 people and 70 people. And that is the same answer to why we need the time. Now, I don't want to talk past Todd and what the specific language is of what TID and TIF are, but why we need 10 years is because when you move in a big building, we don't have the sales and the people and everything geared for what that building needs to be. It hits balance 10 years from now or 12 years from now. We need to survive the cash responsibility of what comes in, paying our existing people, hiring more people, buying more supplies. And that's the negative intersection that when the project goes from 10, 11, $12 million to what has been more than 20% increase over the last 2.5 years. Now we're sitting in this 14.5, 15.5 process that's where that intersection becomes negative. So I know it's not technically a loan because we're getting a pay-go for that 10-year period, but that's part of our obligation to the Village of Wanakee is that we're saying, my brother Mike and I are making a guarantee that this dollar for dollar at least is coming back into the village's hands. Now you guys get to decide what the bureaucracy is that makes that happen, where that spreads and how that goes. We're making the commitment that we're not trying to not pay that dollar amount. We're just saying if this project's going to happen now and it's going to be successful, because we have to make sure we have enough money to pay the people we got and the people we plan on hiring, then that's the but for is how best I could explain it in a practical language. So if you guys have any more detailed specifics about what a laboratory building is and all the engineering requirements that go into it and how this is another unique building within a business park that has a lot of mixtures of buildings. You got big companies, you got small companies. We're right next to a car repair place that's been in town, D-Car, and plastic automated robotic plastic forming company that was also in the business park that moved in. We're just moving from Middleton. You got Octopi that's growing. So like to have a laboratory supply company right in the middle of that mix is kind of a good buffet potpourri for the park. So I think just in our story and what we bring to it, that's also a good thing. So let me know if you have any more technical questions.
Thanks. I do have one more question. We had a conversation in just a minute or two, if I could ask you about this. We had a conversation earlier on about the crunch and lab space in the Madison area. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that going into the decision.
Yes.
That the group has that information
The
to
other-
build rather than just move.
See, the other challenge is, so we're in about 10,000 square feet now, and we've got about an 1,100 square foot lab inside of there. right? And this is the same building we've been in for over 20 years. And laboratory construction is so complicated and expensive. So our professional fees are more expensive. The time it takes to do the design and engineering is longer and more complicated because the mechanical requirements to be able to do a functional lab that's safe for all the people doing the work and creates the procedural responsibility to what you're trying to accomplish is just really difficult. So the threshold for people who would be able to invest in a facility like this is there might be more other difficult projects, but laboratory science in particular is at that top range. It's much more difficult to do a building that has a major laboratory in it than it would be to just do a combination of an office and a warehouse, which might be the more typical of commercial buildings. So within the Madison area, despite the fact that we have such a strong marketplace for laboratory science, we have such a strong nonprofit base and the university systems and the hospital system, we are as strong as there are in the Midwest in general, outside of probably competing with Minneapolis and Chicago. So we have this really strong presence for laboratory science and healthcare and biotech. But even in the fact that everyone knows it's a successful institutional investment in this town, we're still remarkably underinvested. But we are experiencing in the challenges of making this project happen, why it's so difficult to do that laboratory science. So us being able to come to Wanakee, us going from 1,100 square feet of laboratory space to 5,500 square feet of laboratory space, not only means that we can be able to serve our own specific operational requirements as a company, but we can start, engaging in, Mike's got a more detailed way of describing this, but interactions of training of histologists into the circumstance, whether it's through Madison College or through other types of, we have people that we've trained that have gone onto the UW. And so that part of just having a functional lab, another functional lab in the general area, and then we're specifically starting that in the Wanakee Business Park is a positive, because outside of the fact that we can describe how much we need it, it's also does serve the local interaction, because we service and support the UW and Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostic Lab. Rental expense for laboratory is limited and very expensive. So it can come as a part of the but-for conversation also, is that we looked into renting and we looked into leasing and we looked into every single option that it is. When you have to design and build a laboratory to provide a specific procedural requirement to what you're doing, it's not an easy thing of just finding the nice space down the street. There are more rental facilities in this area than there are in most places, but because of the concentration of laboratory science in our town, those spaces are limited to get and also expensive. And your expense then to make a leasehold improvement to fulfill that operation specific to what you're doing then adds on to that expense also, making for what we need to accomplish, which is the replacement of the fact that we've been in a location, a loyal Middleton resident for now with that location over 20 years, that we're trying to do that again. We're trying to land this big investment that will allow us this one move, and then we can just plant there and allow the company to grow in an incremental slow way, because it's expensive to move and we don't want to do this again.
All right. All right. Thanks. Abby, did you have any questions?
This might not be relevant. I'm new to this committee, but I think Linda brought up a good point of there is also a housing shortage around here. I'm sure everyone has heard about that in the news at this point. And so I think it is important to justify why you put money into the commercial side and whatever. And so I think your point of we supply the university, we supply all these biotech things, and we're going to bring jobs is really important. I wonder if perhaps some of the public would be more interested if there was a way to say work with the schools where there's kids who are interested in lab STEM. Maybe they can come in outside of hours, get a tour, stuff like that. I wonder if there's other ways to connect the community into those kinds of spaces, because I mean, really, you're right. It's really hard to find lab space. It's really hard to get into. And I think that there's a lot of really bright kids in the school district here that could be inspired by just being in your guys' space. So I think that would be a great reason to have a company like yours here locally in town. Yeah, please. I see you're excited. I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, the best answer I have for that is to, kind of paint a picture of where we've been trying to take the company for years, so I've been slowly working with MATC to begin with, now Madison College. I work directly with Mary Ellen Krause, so she's the biotechnology director or chair for the school. Actually just talked with her yesterday. A couple of our professional histologists are going to go in October to do a presentation to I think they're the second year class, right? Because they don't teach histology there at Madison College. So we've traditionally brought their second term folks into the company as a paid internship, and most folks get hired on, some folks don't. But based on our facility requirements, we've never been able to do more than maybe 1 or 2 people a year, right? But we're going to go from a laboratory that has 9 microtomes in it to a laboratory that could have 20 to 30 microtomes in it. More than enough room we're going to need for quite a long time. I know one of the things that Mary Ellen Krause is working on is a high school program. I don't know a lot about it. And it's something I told her we really can't engage with right now in where we're at, but that if we can get to the new lab in the bigger space, it'd be very exciting to have not only a specific training program for their graduates to come to Newcomer to learn histology, to either place with us or to place in other laboratories regionally and nationally, because across the country, histology jobs are in high demand. It's an older science as far as the diagnostic world goes, but it's a bedrock of the diagnostic world, and training people on microtomy, which is something I can talk about more if you really want to, is not easy. It takes time, and labs are in desperate need of people coming with that skill. So yeah, be excited to bring high school students in. I technically don't know how we would do it, but I'm sure we can figure it out.
Details, we can figure them out.
Details come later.
We won't make you answer that tonight. Do we have any other questions?
I do. I appreciate the story, and I appreciate the fact you're seriously considering Wanakee. I think it's great for you to move from Middleton to Wanakee, and would love to have you as a business here and get to know more about you guys. Plus, I had to look up what histology was, having not known ever what that meant before, but now I have some background. But one of the comments, and I'm sure, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but why only one lot being added to TID number 9? And you talked at great length about expansion and growth, and those are all good things. And we like to hear that. But like Octopi, eventually, you perhaps outgrow that space. And it's not necessarily directed at you, because I'm suspecting you could certainly buy some other land, but not part of TID 9. But just out of curiosity, is it common for a TID to be extended by one lot and only one lot? It just seems like it's much ado about, I don't want to say nothing, but why wouldn't we expand that to something greater than one lot?
I think I can take that. So the village board gave direction to staff regarding a process to create TID 10, which would involve several lots out in the business park. That for a while was put on hold. And so the Welch's indicated that they needed a higher degree of certainty and certainty about the timeline in which that would be created. We couldn't provide that at the time. So the original boundary of TID 10 did include their property. However, that was on as I mentioned, on hold. Subsequently, that's re-engaged, but there's several things and pieces of information that are needed to bring that forward. So they said, we want to go through the process. The village board said, okay, it's a one lot TID. You're right. That's probably unusual. However, that the timeline was critical to them to get their project moving forward. And if I may, on your comment, I'm not sure if you're aware, but they actually do have a site plan approved for that site, which does allow for expansion on the site. So I think that they have taken growth into consideration already.
Thank you. One other question I have, if I may, and that's getting back to the projections that were done by the Ayler Group. The rate of $18.40, the mill rate of $18.40. And the village just having gone through some form of reassessment whereby on average, properties went up 31%. I'm suspecting the 1840 is going to drop to something much less, perhaps by 31%, based on the assessed value. How does that affect the projections?
So a revaluation doesn't affect the rate that we show on here because everything for tax incremental financing is done on an equalized basis. So a reval does not affect it. What does affect it, and the reason that we have seen some declines in that equalized rate is because under state law, there are levy limits. And so when you have economic growth, municipalities, counties cannot raise the levy to tax on that economic growth, and that has the effect of driving the rate down. So we have seen some downward pressure on rates, but it's not due to revaluation, it's due to the levy limit law. And under the contemplated agreement, again, it would be 10 years. So the incentive amount would be determined by the taxes actually paid. And if the rate were to go down and the value of the facility did not go up at a rate that would essentially offset that, that projection could be diminished and a lesser amount would be received.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions?
I don't have questions, just comments, Kristen, if this is a good
Yes.
time. So I think three things. One, and I've been very open in supporting commercial growth, industrial growth, to try to balance the residential growth that we've had in Wanakee, because I think that's very important to have a healthy, diversified economy in the community. It supports our tax base at a higher rate than residential. It provides the jobs and job opportunities for our residents and future residents as they grow up. And they also support our nonprofits and our community groups to a much higher degree than residents, who are very supportive as well in this community. But I think it's a different level. In this particular case, and going back to the but-for, I, in my experience, have never had someone offer to repay an incentive, that wasn't a clawback or something like that. It was. So I think that demonstrates the true need that they'd have, because I don't think a company would want to be encumbered by that future payments if they could just handle it up front. So I think, in my opinion, that's a pretty clear indication that is a necessary need for their growth. And third, going back to the lab space and just the biotech industry in general, Wanakee has, a small with scientific protein labs, a couple of companies, but as the Madison region grows and continues to try to find places to put these types of companies, lab space, et cetera, they tend to want to cluster. So adding another biotech, health, life science company into the business park, I think is a great reason to support this.
And I would agree. Early on in our conversations, we did talk about Wanakee as a destination that some of your employees preferred because it was easy to commute. I like the idea of us being able to attract a resident base that is able to fill jobs like this, and for other entrepreneurs to be able to view Wanakee as a destination for biotech companies. So perhaps this gets us a little step further in that direction. Any other questions or comments? No, we are allowed to go into closed session for this. No, we are not. Oh, we are not. That is our next item. Okay. I need my reading glasses, those asterisks. So my bad. All right, then, seeing no other, and since we're not going into closed session, seeing no other questions, do we have any?
I would recommend to, oh my gosh, let me start over. I move to adopt the resolution recommending to the village board that the project plan and boundaries of tax increment district number 9 be amended as shown in exhibits A and B.
I'll second.
All right, any discussion on the motion? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. All right. So next up, then it goes to, what was our next date on that? If we review that calendar again?
September 5th to the village board.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you.
All right. And item number, let's see here, 3. Continued discussion on possible acquisition of downtown parcels for redevelopment and possible recommendation for village board. And I believe, if I use my good eye, that we can go into closed session for this one? So Tim, do you want to
I-
present it first?
Do I have to read that statement again
I may
first?
defer Brian to
Okay.
the specific language regarding that, but just a quick recap. So we discussed in general last time the potential for the degree to which the village would want to participate in redevelopment of certain areas of the village. I guess I will leave it there in terms of pitching the specific language regarding going into closed session.
Sure. I mean, what we talked about, I think last time in open session was
Mhm.
the idea of acquiring land in the downtown is a policy discussion that is held in
Mhm.
open session. To the extent that you want to talk about specific properties and potential terms and conditions of acquisition of those specific properties, that is appropriate for a closed session discussion. And I'm just looking at page 38 of your packet. I mean, you have the appropriate closed session language. So essentially, if you are going to move in closed session, somebody would move to go into closed session, would read that language, then somebody would second, and then you'd have a roll call vote.
All right. So policy and open, specific discussion and closed.
Yeah, so
Correct.
if, I mean, again, if you want to have should a municipality or should the village of Wanakee specifically be looking into acquiring properties, whether it's downtown or elsewhere, that's a policy discussion for open session. Specific properties, and I think you did have
Mhm, you did
some
have it,
discussion
yeah.
in open session last time.
Yeah.
I think the reason why Tim put this back on the agenda was to have the ability to discuss specific
Specific
properties,
questions.
which is appropriate for closed session.
Excellent. So should we move into closed session? Before we do that, does anybody have any comments they want to make on policy or general approaches? No. Seeing none. All right, then I will make the motion that we move into closed session to discuss specific properties.
Yeah, so
Wait,
then
no.
we need to, like, if you look at page 38 of the packet, with the individual, as the individual making the motion, Kristen, you would read where it starts, the CDA may convene in closed session, and you need to read that
All
whole
right.
paragraph.
Before I make the motion?
I think you can,
Okay, I'll
it's a
read
move
it.
to go into closed session for the following purpose and then read
For
it.
the following purpose, the CDA may convene in closed session as authorized by Wisconsin statute 19.851E for the purpose of deliberating or negotiating the purchase of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specific public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. The CDA may reconvene in open session and discuss and take action on the subject matter discussed in closed session. So I move to go into closed session. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Oh, no, we need a roll call vote.
Oh, we need a roll call vote. I'll get it one of these days.
Kristen Runge,
Yes.
Tricia Brown,
Yes.
Al Dasso,
Yes.
David Kennedy,
Yes.
Abigail Zellner.
Yes, yes,
All right.
excuse me.
All right.
And I was gonna mention that,
Yeah.
Tim, I don't think we have an expectation of action at all this evening.
All right. We will not.
Are you-
We'll
I would agree with
reconvene
that.
to adjourn probably. Yep. There we go.